I'm Stephanie, and welcome to Wine Club. This is a playlist where I drink good wine and I whine about bad books. So today I'm talking about No One Will Miss Her by Kat Rosenfield. So let's take a look at the back cover copy. On an October morning, a homicide investigator pulls into the hard-luck town of Copper Falls, Maine. The junkyard is burning, and the local pariah, Lizzie Ouellette, is dead, with her husband Dwayne nowhere to be found. Adrienne Richards, blonde and fabulous social media influencer and wife of a disgraced billionaire, has been renting Lizzie's tiny lake house as a country getaway, even though Copper Falls is anything but a resort town. As Adrienne's connection to the case becomes clear, so too does her connection to Lizzie, who narrates their story from beyond the grave. The women navigate a relationship that cuts across class boundaries, transactional, complicated, and finally, deadly. A gone girl for the gig economy, this is a story of privilege and identity as two devious women from opposite worlds discover the dangers of coveting someone else's life. So first, I do want to say that there are going to be spoilers in this review, and secondly, like all my reviews, this is solely about the book, not Rosenfield as a person. I will say, this is a total impulse buy while shopping for a white elephant gift for Christmas, and if I didn't love my family, I'd probably try to re-gift this next year. This was some poor judgment on my part, especially after reading that back cover copy, because I don't think it's really true to what the story ends up being, but I'm pretty sure someone's going to have to monitor my book buying habits from now on. So let's cover the good, the bad, and the ugly of this book. So first up on the good, I will say Rosenfield is a very good writer, and she makes really great word choices. She can craft some powerful paragraphs, and I marked some passages that I thought were really well done. So actually, chapter 1, the lake was quiet. No droning motors, no shouting kids. Nothing but the rustling of the wind, the musical trickle of water beneath the wooden docks, a single loon crying in the distance. The sheriff's deputy knocked that morning at 6 houses, 6 empty houses with locked doors and vacant driveways, until the speech he'd prepared about the evacuation order died in his mind from lack of use. There were only 2 houses left when he pulled up to number 13, rolling his eyes reflexively at the name spray painted on the mailbox. For a moment, he even considered skipping this one, thinking to himself that if Earl Ouellette's junkyard burning to the ground was a solid start, then his daughter choking to death on its ashes would be an excellent finish. Only for a moment, of course, he'd assure himself of that later, as he drowned the day in a bottle of Jameson, drinking hard to dull the memory of the horrible things he'd seen. Another passage that I also really liked, on page 48. It happened the summer that I was 11, still young enough to feel that the place we'd lived had a kind of magic to it. Our trailer sat at the end of the lot nearest the road, the heaps rising up behind it like an ancient ruined city. It felt like the edge of another world, and I liked to pretend that it was. And we were its keepers, my father and I, sentries at the borderland, charged with guarding ancient secrets from trespassers and plunderers. Snaking corridors of hard-packed dirt wound between the piles of scrap metal, splintered furniture, broken and discarded toys. There was a line of busted-up cars marking the property line to the west, stacked like oblong building blocks, so old that they had been there not just since before I was born, but since before Pop took the place over. Pop hated them. He worried out loud that they would topple one day, and warned me away from ever climbing them. But there was nothing to be done. The machine that had been used to lift and stack them had long since rolled off to pay some debt, and so the cars stayed, slowly rusting. I would weave my way back to the place where that line ended, where the heap stopped and the woods began, a narrow path of yellowed grass winding into the trees just beyond the bumper of a crushed Camaro. That was the oldest part of the property, from some long ago time, before it became a repository for unwanted things. 100 yards into the trees was my favorite spot. A clearing where the rusted-out husks of 3 ancient trucks sat facing each other, sunk into the earth up to the wheel wells. Nobody knew who they belonged to, or how they'd come to be left there, nose to nose, like they were paused in the middle of a conversation. But I loved the shape of them. The curvy hoods, the heavy chrome fenders, the big black bug-eyed holes where the headlights used to be. They were a part of the landscape now. Then another passage that I really liked, chapter 15, so page 129. We're almost at the end now, the Big Bang, and everything after. Blood on the wall and soaked into the carpet, a body under a blanket. cops picking up shattered teeth and bits of bone with tweezers and dumping them into a bucket marked Oulette Elizabeth. I wonder what they'll do with the pieces. Whether they'll be dumped down a sink somewhere or buried with the rest. I wonder what they'll put on my gravestone, if I have one. It's always someone else who decides how you'll be remembered. It's the name they called you that goes on the epitaph. Daughter, wife, lover, liar, trash bag. So again, I think Rosenfield has a great knack for writing. I really do think her prose is beautiful, her writing is great. On the flip side of that, after a while, my eyes do start glazing over, especially when it concerns like the tons and tons of paragraphs of inner monologues, or, Lizzie's telling me exactly who she is, who Adrian is, who Dwayne was. I don't need all of that, but I do think, again, her setting up settings or just kind of evoking that feeling, she does a great job of doing that. Speaking of Dwayne, after what Dwayne did when they were kids, I was kind of appalled she even gave him the time of day, let alone sleep with him and then marry him. But to that credit, I do think that Rosenfield does a really good job of pointing out the hypocrisy of a small town, berating and blaming the woman for getting pregnant and ruining a man's life instead of acknowledging that he obviously had a hand or a certain body part in it too. I also think she did a fantastic job showing that childhood innocence and the way that it can be snatched away and destroyed. I mean, disillusionment is a bitch. So let's move on to the bad of the book. So I was torn between putting this in the bad or the ugly, but the twist is really meh. You could kind of see it coming, even though it's unbelievable. And I mean literally unbelievable. Essentially, Lizzie isn't dead. She killed Adrian and took her place. Come on. First up, if this was a high-profile case, there would be DNA testing, dental records, or even matching the thumbprints to her driver's license. They wouldn't take one look at a boob mole and go, yes, that must be her. Lizzie killed Adrian and then cut off her own mole on her breast to superglue it onto Adrian. What in the what? Also, after the twist is revealed, there's not much substance left to carry the story, and the twist comes two-thirds of the way in, and then we still have a bit of the book left, and it's really just kind of closing everything out. So from there on, the pacing gets not so great. Also, what exactly is Lizzie's plan? Does she know Adrian's social security number? Does Adrian not have any friends who will take one good hard look at Lizzie and realize that they're not the same person? How did Bird, the cop, not realize? Rosenfield kind of wanted it both ways, that Lizzie is such a non-entity that people in town treated her like shit, but then she's also a dead ringer for Adrian, who is supposed to be fabulous and beautiful and just people are constantly looking at her. Sense this is not making. Honestly, if the story had been set in the 80s or 90s, I'd potentially buy it because they wouldn't have had the same methods of uncovering the truth of what really happened. But since it is set in 2021, no, you don't get away with super gluing a mole onto somebody and stealing their life. It doesn't add up. Also, Bird, the cop, is a moron. I cannot take him seriously as a member of law enforcement. Plus the sudden, and I do mean sudden, inclusion of this cold case that he was working at the end. What was the point? Was the point literally just to get him away from the crime scene of Lizzie and Adrian? Because otherwise there's no allusion to it. There's no leading up to it. It literally is just oh yes, I have been working this cold case and I'm going to go back to it. If that's true, then there should have been that undercurrent of him being so invested in Lizzie's case because he wants to make up for it or he doesn't want this case to turn cold. Figuring out the why and what, and it just, I don't know. It just came out of nowhere, and I'm am I supposed to care? Because there's 50 pages left. How invested in this subplot do I need to be? I also think that some of the things that Rosenfield added just didn't really add anything to the overall story. What's up with all the baseball in this book? The characters don't seem to care about it, and I sure as shit don't. It was Rosenfield thought that she needed to throw in some characterization for both Lizzie and Bird, and this was it. This was not it. And it really took me out of the story. There's a scene where they're both listening to a baseball game, and I get that it's, I guess, trying to tie them together in a moment of time, but neither of them really seem to care, and again, it's not I don't feel like it's a metaphor for anything, so it really didn't add much to the story from my side. And then lastly, like I mentioned earlier, the pacing is quite slow given its style. It is very deep, it is very introspective, and then again, once the reveal happens, there's still quite a bit of the book to go. Like, where are we going from here? So let's move on to the ugly of this book, and there's quite a bit that needs to be unpacked here. So first up, severe trigger warning, and I mean severe. I had to skip pages 54 to 57 in my printed paperback copy. I have a tough stomach. I watch Forensic Files right before I go to bed, and I sleep peacefully. The scene that I had to skip was messed up. Like, if you cannot stand animal abuse or people hurting animals, skip these pages in the paperback version. I knew it was coming, and like immediately, like I felt sick. I do understand her point of including it, just showing how terrible Dwayne was as a kid, but it's also, nope, I can't do a scene of someone hurting a cat. Nope, not up my alley. Also, moving on to something a little less ugly than the cat abuse, the characters are kind of cardboard cutouts. There's the poor girl and the rich bitch. They don't have a lot of dimension or color to them. Lizzie gets a bit of it with like her son, or her pregnancy and her son's storyline, but it's not given enough room to breathe. Lizzie had a lot of potential if we could explore her bitterness, her need to be outwardly angry to protect herself, but at the same time, if she's able to be this calculating enough to pull off a murder and take over someone's life, like, surely she could put that ambition and work ethic to better use, get the hell out of her crappy town, figure out something new for her life. It's kind of like, again, Forensic Files, when a spouse murders the other, instead of just going through the divorce. Like, think it through, people. You're gonna get caught. I mean, well, I guess Lizzie does get away with it, so maybe these people need to take a page out of her book. I'm also not really sure that I could classify this as a thriller. It's more of a character study than a thriller with deep descriptions of who people are at their core. It's a fine concept, but then don't market it as a thriller. Like, even the quote on the front is from an author that I hate, but blade sharp, whip smart, and genuinely original. A thriller to refresh your belief that a story can still outpace and outsmart you, by A.J. Finn. So, first up, don't trust your judgment, A.J. Finn. I don't think you can write either. But I don't think this thriller really refreshed the belief that a story can still outpace and outsmart me. I already talked about the pacing was very slow, so I'm faster than the pacing of this. Didn't outsmart me. I knew what twist was coming, and really it just refreshes my belief that anything can get published these days. For a thriller, there were few thrills to be had. I mean, I guess if you like the psychology part of psychological thrillers, you might like this. It's kind of the same reason that I don't like a lot of Lisa Jewell books. They're marketed as thrillers, but essentially they're just case studies on some questionable characters and what it means to be a person. There's nothing wrong with that, but just marketed appropriately. Like, again, this didn't really feel like a thriller, especially since we're following the quote-unquote dead character. Also, again, going back to like the pacing problems, I was skimming near the end and kind of just ready for it to be done, and then the ending is just unsatisfactory. Like, there's even a scene where Lizzie, posing as Adrian, hooks up with Bird, and like neither of them really think anything about it, and it's just, dude, you have been like investigating this woman. It kind of seems like he knows that it's Lizzie too, and we don't get anything from it, so I don't know. At the end of the day, the suspension of disbelief required for this plot to work out would hold up a bridge to Mars, which I'm all for giving the author the suspension of disbelief, but not at this magnitude. Again, either change the time period that this book takes place in or find a more clever way to make your twist work. This just did not work with where we're at with science. Maybe watch a few episodes of Forensic Files and like take note of when things kind of change with DNA testing. So, have you read No One Will Miss Her? Let me know your thoughts, or let me know if I'm missing something from this book by leaving your thoughts in the comments below. Otherwise, I'll catch you next time on Wine Club.